2, 1. Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Hill Country's Sunday Zoom meeting for August 30th. August is over? What? When did that happen? Well, it's a pleasure to see everyone. And wow, we're here, huh? And it's hot. All right. Sorry, bear with me. We are pleased, so pleased and elated to have everyone here and gathering together. If I could read this Gathering in Our Own Spaces by Jeff May. Come, gather, not into a common space, sharing a physical closeness that we long for, precluded by a wise choice. But come, gather into this common time and a common space. We need to be together. We yearn for connection. We hunger for the familiar faces of friends. The sound of shared voices proclaiming who we are, where we're going, that which resonates with our hopes, our dreams, and our values. Come, gather. We are here in this space made of all spaces, and we share our becoming in this moment. Okay, and now we'll do the opening hymn. All right, and now is the time of announcements. If you do have any announcements, please raise your hand or put it in the chat, and let me know. I would like to announce that you're all awesome, and I'm so happy we're all together. Now it is time for the offering. As you know, the, what? Huh? Oh, as you know, the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Hill Country is entirely supported by us because we're really cool people. So if you do have a donation, please go ahead and drop it off at the church or
in the mail.
Or in the mail. Mail's cool because we gotta support the mail system. So thank y'all very much. All right, now we will light the chalice. Yes, okay. For the chalice lighting, we come together every week, bound not by a creed or a mutual desire to please one God or many gods, yet we are drawn together by a belief. That is how we are in the world. Who we are together matters. We light this chalice together in the knowledge that love, not fear, can change the world. I can't read this. Okay. Well, right, and we will read the mission statement. We journey.
Okay, I haven't time to share that.
Wait, we're going to share it first. My bad. We journey together, guided by UU values, to seek, nurture, and serve our loving church family, our community, and our world. And let us all do the affirmation together. If you're willing to, no problem. The doctrine of this church is love. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. And this is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship, as we strive to have all souls grow into harmony with the divine. Oh, wow. That's brave. Seriously. Exactly, Susan. Okay. Anything else? All right. Now we'll have our hymn, Morning Has Broken by Cat Stevens. Cat. All right. And now for today's sermon, The Theist In Me by Bruce Clear, presented by Janet. Take it away.
This sermon is the second in a series of 3 by Reverend Bruce Clear. I was unable to find the date that these sermons were written or delivered. Based on some of his remarks, I believe it was between 1996 and 1998. Reverend Clear earned a Doctor of Ministry in 1983 and served in Portland, Oregon, Vancouver, Washington, and Indianapolis, Indiana. In his words, "You may have noticed that I do not completely attach myself to one label. I do not speak, as I've heard another minister do, under the title of why I am a humanist, or why I am a theist, or why I am a Christian. The fact is that Unitarian Universalism in general, and this speaker in particular, is quite pliant and adaptable. A single label rarely captures the essence. Our religion could be and has been called a fuzzy religion, for it does not demand precise categories or labels. Last week, I spoke of the humanist in me, and in doing so, I spoke of my appreciation for and commitment to that tradition which honors reason as the arbiter of belief. Reason is the keystone of the humanist view, and it warrants my solid intellectual and religious respect and commitment. In honoring reason, humanism rejects supernaturalism. This is part of the humanism that is in me. Rejecting the supernatural does not necessarily entail rejecting the sense of the sacred or the sense of the holy, or for that matter, the sense of the divine. There is a theist in me as well as a humanist. The God of this theism, though, is a natural, not a supernatural God. It is not the God of children's stories, nor is it the God of traditional lore. This God is not easy to describe or explain, so it deserves having a whole sermon devoted to it. The idea of God arose from vague sources in the misty human past. Many psychologists suggest that the idea of God arose from our mental projections. According to Freud, for example, we began to believe in a God because even as we grow older, we crave the protective care of a parent. So we exalt the memory of our own parents, or the parents we wish we had, and call that all-powerful idea God. Others say the idea arose out of our ignorance of how the world works. Since our ancestors could not adequately explain the weather or the seasons or the sun and the moon, they invented the idea of an all-powerful, supernatural, conscious being who could control these mysteries that were beyond our understanding. Whatever the historical source of the idea of God, we know that the idea is pervasive in the human race. There has probably been more thought and writing throughout history on this subject than any other single idea. In the Great Books series, which contains the writings of such great figures as Homer, Aristotle, Shakespeare, Tolstoy, and Darwin, the two thickest volumes are the indices, which give a subject reference to the ideas contained in the great books. The indices are broken down into what it calls great ideas, such as democracy, truth, and love. In the chapter referencing the great book writings on the subject of God, one finds the following claim. In sheer quantity of references, as well as in variety, this chapter on God is the largest chapter. The reason is obvious. More consequences for thought and action follow from the affirmation or denial of God than from answering any other basic question. According to this, then, the idea of God is probably the most popular idea in the great writings of Western civilization. This fact has a particular sting to it when one realizes that the next 20 minutes or so will be devoted to thoughts on this subject from a humble minister from Indiana. I don't believe that the existence of God, or for that matter, any claim about God, can be proven. The question, does God exist, is a non sequitur. It has no meaning. The question implies that we can talk about God in the same way we talk about cows or leprechauns or triangles. I have at times mentioned the ancient Hebrew tradition in which the name of God is unutterable. In Hebrew scriptures, the name for God is rendered by the initials YHWH, which today we pronounce Yahweh. And the word Yahweh, the linguists tell us, means it causes to be, or it causes existence. To say that God exists is to confuse God, the source of existence, with the things that exist themselves. I do not believe that God exists. I do not believe in the existence of a being to whom I ascribe the name God. And yet at the same time, I do believe in God. I believe in a unifying force of the universe to which I may relate and on which I may rely. I do not believe that God exists, yet I do believe in God. I expect the juxtaposition of these two sentences to be confusing for you. I hope so, because it is confusing for me too. But it reinforces my conviction that talking about God tends to raise more confusion than clarity. And that's why I talked about God so very rarely in public. This morning, I will talk about God, and I wish to share with you some of the thinking I've done recently about that concept. And I begin with a humbling disclaimer. I have nothing reliable to say about God. In fact, no one has anything certain or reliable to say about this subject. It is too often the case that those who speak about God presume rather to speak for God. They tell us about what God approves and disapproves. They tell us what pleases God and what angers God and what God wants us to do. In most talk about God, the speaker's opinions are presented as God's opinions, and therefore the speaker doesn't need to claim responsibility for his or her views. They are, as it is alleged, from God. As for me, I feel more comfortable speaking my own opinions and not burdening God with the blame or credit for what I say. There is nothing reliable or certain that can be said on the subject of God, but there is, I suggest, Much that can be said that is interesting, and probably a few things that can be said that are useful. While we cannot speak about what God is like, we can, at least, speak about our human experiences of the divine. Such experiences, found continuously throughout human history, are, I think, often interesting and perhaps occasionally useful. It is in that spirit that I approach the subject this morning. My approach is like that of T.S. Eliot, that great secular poet who spent so much of his life in search of God. Eliot spoke about the human experience of the divine as the point of intersection between the timeless with time. Here is what he wrote in part. To apprehend the point of intersection of the timeless with time is an occupation for the saint. There are only hints and guesses, hints followed by guesses, and the rest is prayer, observance, discipline, thought, and action. The hint half guessed, the gift half understood, is incarnation. Hints and guesses, says Eliot. For me, that is all we can say about the divine. We begin with our own experience. We learn from the experiences of others. And what we gain in understanding the divine, which is ineffable, beyond the human world of knowledge, is merely hints and guesses. So this morning, I will share with you some of my hints and guesses about God. What is God? What is the Theist in me? I cannot answer with any reliability or certainty, any more than the ancient Hebrews could. But I can offer, in the words of Eliot, some hints and guesses. These hints and guesses arise out of both common and uncommon experience. Hint number one. There is something that urges people to love and care for one another. Rabbi Harold Kushner, who has written movingly about the meaning of suffering, wrote the following about God. When people ask me, where is God? I tell them I would rather rephrase the question to read, when is God? Asking where implies that God is an object located in a specific place, and if we could just find the right place, we would find God. Asking when is God gives us the idea that God can be anywhere if the right things are happening. When people are loving, brave, truthful, charitable, God is present. God is not in the place, but in the moment. Martin Buber, when asked, where is God found, would reply that when people treat each other in a truly human fashion, God fills in the empty space between them. Like an electric arc between poles, God is not so much in either person as in the relationship that connects one with the other. The love and care that is expressed between and among human beings is, for me, an expression of the divinity that lies behind the logic and order of the universe. This, I think, is the meaning of the following line written by E. Cummings. Love is a deeper season than the reason. So the first hint about God is that there is something that urges people to love and care for one another. Hint number two, life is meaningful. At least this is my experience of life. There is no particular reason why life should be meaningful. You were born, you live, you die. And yet somehow in that simple formula, people have been able to fill their years of existence with meaningful acts and contribute to the greater enjoyment of life by all. The great psychologist Rob May died back in 1994. I suppose I subscribe to his definition of religion, that religion is the assumption that life has meaning. One's religious attitude is to be found at that point where he or she has a conviction that there are values in human existence worth living and dying for. So if you assume that life carries meaning, you are, by this definition, religious. Where does this meaning come from? I suppose we create it ourselves mostly, or inherit it from others to some extent. But it is not absurd to suggest that meaning has as its source what everything else has as its source. I remember in my study of Alfred North Whitehead's philosophy being perplexed by the fact that he talked about God at all. Whitehead offers a fairly complex but complete system. His metaphysics offer to explain why things are the way they are in fully natural, not supernatural ways. Why then did he talk about God? I poured through dozens of books about Whitehead, searching for an answer, until I finally found one. It was only a sentence or two, but it suggested a reason. Whitehead needed God, the author said, to explain novelty in the world. Novelty, that something new happens, that something unexpected happens, such as a genetic mutation, for example. The world can go on tomorrow, pretty much as it did today, but somehow something tomorrow will be different. And another philosopher, the Unitarian Henry Nelson Wieman, called it creativity. Novelty or creativity, whatever it is, there is something that allows us to face life with fresh vigor, with excitement, and with meaning. Life is meaningful, or at least it can be. There is no reason why life should be meaningful, but for many people, it is. Meaning arises from the novelty and creativity of the human imagination, novelty and creativity being normal components of nature itself. From that creativity, we can create meaning. The discovery of meaning, for many of us, is a hint at what Eliot called the intersection of the timeless with time. Hint number 3. It seems increasingly clear that science is moving toward a theory of cosmic unity and interrelatedness. While it used to be the case that science tried to study nature while isolating it into its discrete parts, today science is increasingly finding that nothing can be understood in isolation from the rest of the world. Every atom in the universe is related to all other atoms. Physicist David Bohm has written about the unity of the cosmos and suggests a theory that the whole of the universe is somehow greater than the sum of its parts. The universe is a living system, just as on a smaller scale, we are living systems. It is easy to consider the human person as being greater than the sum of its parts. We are only now beginning to understand the cosmos as such a living system too. As parents watching our children grow, we are fascinated by the development of their individual personhoods. They have their own personalities, their own memories, their own private thoughts. We recognize in our children their own consciousness and emotions. Each one, we come to conclude, is far greater than just the sum of his or her parts. Each one is, in fact, a person. So too, Bohm would say, the universe seems to be more than the sum of its parts. Beyond the vast sea of energy that fills the void between the planets and the stars, there seems to be a creative force, what he called holo movement, that gives the universe a unifying character, not unlike the unifying character of someone's personality. The universe is more than the sum of its parts, and in the universe can be observed, as Eliot so poetically noted, the intersection of the timeless with time. Hint number 4. I am amazed at the human capacity to overcome tragedy and pain. For example, I stand in admiration of any alcoholic who is able to control that disease. I am impressed by those who have suffered the deep pain of loss and can still live with hope. Where do they find their strength? There is nothing supernatural about it, not at all. It is altogether natural, but it is also sacred. Again, I will let Harold Kushner speak. I believe in miracles, but I believe only in big miracles, not little miracles. Things like parting the Red Sea or making the sun stand still are not miracles for me. They are special effects. Cecil B. DeMille or Steven Spielberg can do it as easily. Authentic miracles happen when weak people become strong, when timid people show courage, when selfish people turn generous. I can believe in God, not because someone has proven it to me philosophically, but because I so often see ordinary people become capable of the most extraordinary accomplishments. Hint number 5. There is something that connects me to the rest of the universe. That, at least, is how I feel. There is an underlying logic and a penetrating power that oversees the pattern of the planets, the seasons of the year, and the flux of my own life. Let me call it the reason or rationality of the universe. The 19th century Romantics wrote of reason, always with a capital R, as the divine source that influenced all things. Perhaps I belong in the 19th century, but that image makes some sense to me. Or perhaps I belong in the 1st century, for the early Christians also used the same metaphor when speaking of logos as a word for God. Logos means reason, or the logic of the universe, an inherent orderliness or harmony that all things honor, that allow things to make sense. There is a dusty old book I found on my shelf, published over a century ago, that seems to connect with the modern physicist's view of the cosmic unity. The book is entitled The Idea of God and was written by John Fiske, a philosophy professor at Harvard. This book was written in the 1880s, not long after Darwin's theories had challenged some of the traditional religious doctrines. Fiske felt himself to be a philosopher of evolution. Darwin, he felt, had revolutionized scientific knowledge, and it was his task to examine the philosophical implications of Darwinism. It was this effort that produced the book. In it, Fiske looked at the religious implications of Darwinism. What results is, in fact, a description of the universe that could have been written by 20th century physicists like Bohm. Fiske writes, "If the study of physics has taught us anything, it is that nowhere in nature is inertness to be found. All is quivering with energy." For Fiske, this persistent energy is called, no kidding, force. One wonders if Han Solo had read Fiske. It is, he says, the animating principle of the universe, but elsewhere he refers to it as power, the infinite and eternal power. And I am a part of that power, just as you are a part of that power. There is something that connects us to the rest of the universe. Call it reason or rationality. Call it logos or logic. Call it nature or God. Whatever it is, it hints at what Eliot described as the intersection of the timeless with time. We are there in that intersection. Hint number 6. We live with conscience, with a sense of moral rightness, with a sense of duty. Something urges us to do that which is right. Something shames us when we do wrong, even when no one else knows. I do not believe in a God of reward and punishment, but somehow the logic of the universe compels us to develop a conscience and to know, for the most part, when we are doing right and when we are doing wrong. Immanuel Kant, who only rarely had a way with words, offered what is, for me, the most precise summary of religious sensibility when he wrote, "Two things fill the mind with ever new and increasing wonder and awe, the starry heavens above me and the moral law within me." These two items, the starry heavens above and the moral law within, are the two components of any complete religion. These are the hints and guesses about God that come out of my experiences. I confess that they don't say very much about God, certainly nothing reliable or certain, but I find them to be interesting and I find them to be useful. I do not believe in the existence of God, but I do believe in God. The theist in me believes in God the same way the idealist in me believes in truth. I do not believe that something exists that we can call truth. Truth does not have its own separate existence. It permeates all of life. Truth can be experienced, though never fully understood. I do believe that there is a truthful quality to experience that excites us and edifies us. I suppose I believe in God in the same way I believe in truth. Truths, like God, are revealed to us only in part. There is always more truth to explore, more truth to experience. The theist in me is of the sort that was described by John Haynes Holmes, the great Unitarian minister of the first half of this century. When I say the word God, it is poetry and not theology. Nothing that any theologian ever wrote about God has helped me much, but everything the poets have written about flowers and birds and skies and seas, the saviors of the human race, and God, whoever that may be, has at one time or another reached my soul. More and more as I grow older, I live in the lovely thought of these seers and prophets. The theologians gather dust upon the shelves of my library, but the poets are stained with my fingers and blotted with my tears. I never seem so near truth as when I care not what I think or believe, but only that these matters of inner vision would live forever. Poets rarely offer literal descriptions. The great poets deliver to us only hints and guesses about truth. This is indeed a path to the divine. The subject of God rarely comes up in our Unitarian Universalist churches, including this one, because God, as that idea is commonly understood, is more confusing than enlightening. And yet God, as I understand the idea, so permeates every part of existence, in fact, is existence, that whenever life's meaning is discussed, God, whether specified or not, is also discussed. So once in a while, I do talk directly about God, as I've done today. But most of the time, I talk about other things, and any link to God is indirect or implied. To talk about God directly is usually to utter the unutterable, so I can only do it by way of hints and guesses. I will close with another part of T.S. Eliot's poem about the quest for God, for that intersection between the timeless and time. For most of us, there is only the unattended moment, the moment in and out of time, the distraction of it, lost in a shaft of sunlight, or music heard so deeply that it is not heard at all, but you are the music while the music lasts. There are only hints and guesses. This ends our sermon.
Thank you so much, Janet. All right. Well, as we are UUs, we'd love to discuss things. Does anyone have anything they'd like to say? Please raise your hand and Justin will unmute you.
Linda.
Linda.
I was impressed with the sermon when I found it, but listening to it again makes me go, "Oh wow!" It's been very good. Thank you, Janet.
You're welcome.
All right, Jill. Go ahead.
That sermon said in a lot more words and a lot greater clarity than something that I wrote a few months ago, kind of my personal theology. And one of the words that he used is the logic of the universe. And I think the word I used in the piece I wrote was an intelligence that connects everything in the universe. So I would love to have a copy of that. Linda, can you send me a link to it? Because that just crystallized everything for me. And I'd also like to know the reference of the Eliot. Does he reference what Eliot poem that is?
He didn't say.
Okay, so it's probably pretty easy to find on some poetry.
In fact, all these sermons are quite easy to find. If you just Google Bruce Clear, C-L-E-A-R, it pops right up.
It's the Eliot site that I'm going to have to look for, but
Right.
that's not too hard to find. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. This is it. Anyone else? Oh, David. One second here.
Well, I just briefly, it's close to a lot of the thinking and work I've done as a teacher, and my biggest aha moment, maybe of my whole life intellectually, was a short sentence from the philosopher Hegel, who says, "The truth is the whole." W-H-O-L-E, whole. The truth is the whole. And I felt that strongly throughout that whole sermon. And then William Blake's line, "Everything that lives is holy," also kept coming into my mind while Janet was talking.
All right, Vicky.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, great job reading that. I believe the Eliot references to the four quartets. I don't know which section of it, but I believe there's a section in the four quartets that's called the Timeless God. And my guess is that's where those words are excerpted from. That's all.
All right, Mari, you should have a prompt to unmute yourself now. And then Meredith will be next.
Thank you. I really enjoyed that sermon. I consider myself a humanist and don't use the word God because, in a sense, my interpretation of God would offend other people who do believe in God, so I don't use it. However, I really liked this sermon, and it gave me a vocabulary to use that I thought was very helpful. I particularly like the Buber quote, the connection between one another as people. In other words, the I and that thou, which he talks about. I'd like a copy of it very much. It's had a lot in it, and I'd like to look at it again. So, Linda, would you put me on your list too, please? Thank you.
All right, and Meredith.
Yes, I don't know if any of you use Google as much as I do. I spend a lot of time on Google because I'm sort of curious. But just for fun, this week, I pulled up on Google theist meaning. And as Google is doing now, it will give you some interesting quotes or whatever, and then it will ask questions it says that people ask. And a lot of the questions are not very interesting, but some of them are. And I looked at some of them, and then I went to it took me to another place, and I looked at some more, and it took me to another place. And the third place I went to, one of the questions was, what happens if you believe in God, but not in Jesus? And I thought, well, that's kind of a strange question. It seemed rather obvious that many people do not believe in the divinity of Jesus. And so I went to the answer, and much to my surprise, because they do not usually, their answers are usually not a specific religion. The first word was Unitarians. And then it went on to talk about how Unitarians may see Jesus, and there were several things they talked about in this paragraph about Unitarians. And I just thought that was quite surprising. And then it had a referral to some Unitarian things, but it was a big surprise because I had never seen the answer to a Google question be Unitarians, etc.
That is so cool. See, we are the answer. It's just, there's a lot of stuff. All right. What else do we got? Anyone else would like to comment, say something? Okay, great. Well, let us extinguish our chalice. And I'm going to read an extinguishing? Yeah, that makes sense. From Amy Zucker Morgenstern. Never has it been more true than now. We extinguish this flame, but the sparks within us remain alight. From each of us, in our supposed solitude, the signals buzz and hum, sparkling through space to one another, connecting us invisibly, but palpably. We are one, and from every window, our light shines. Thank you guys so much for being here. Go in peace and blessed be.